Parents wanted my master bedroom. They didn't know I'd already sold the house. That sentence echoed in my head as I stood barefoot in the middle of my living room, staring at my mother's email like it was a hotel request form. The subject line read, "Baby room prep, timeline, and mattress options." Beneath that, a long bullet list detailing what needed to be moved, cleaned, or painted in my house, not hers, not theirs, mine. My name is Rosie Huntington. I'm 33 years old, a lead UX strategist at a health tech company based in Portland, Oregon. I work from home. I bought this house 5 years ago, alone, after clawing my way out of a bad startup deal and rebuilding my savings from the ground up. It's not fancy, but it's mine. Or at least it was, until my parents showed up with 2 suitcases and a promise it'd only be for a few weeks. That was 22 months ago. When they first moved in, I didn't question it. My father had lost part of his pension in a failed equity scheme, and my mother claimed the stress gave her tremors. She needed rest. She said, a peaceful environment. I didn't love the idea, but I couldn't say no. I'd grown up watching them argue about rent, food, and who forgot to pick me up from after-school debate tournaments. So, as an adult, I overcompensated. I gave them everything I wished they'd given me when I was younger: space, quiet, structure, even organic groceries. I thought maybe if I loved them enough now, we could rewrite the past. That illusion lasted less than a month. Within 3 weeks, my kitchen had been reorganized without my consent, my reading nook overtaken by Dad's newspaper piles, and every glass in the house smelled faintly of whatever tea Mom decided calmed her digestion that week. I told myself it was temporary. It wasn't. When my half-sister April called last fall to say she and Kevin were expecting, I congratulated them, hung up, and returned to my wireframes. But Mom had other plans. By winter, she was hinting that April might stay here just until the nursery's ready. By spring, April had somehow secured my guest room with the same breezy entitlement she used in high school to borrow my clothes and never return them. Now it was summer. The baby was born 2 weeks ago, and Mom's latest email was a declaration, not a discussion. April and the baby need the master bedroom. You're always working anyway. The basement would be quieter for you. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Quieter for me. The basement. No windows. No heating vents. Just an old couch, a water heater, and a concrete floor I'd never bothered finishing. For a second, I wondered if this was a test if I said no. Would they back off? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. In their minds. This house was already communal property. My bedroom negotiable. My office repurposable. My bank account accessible. Judging by the Uber Eats charges that weren't mine, and the new dining set my mother had accidentally ordered on my card, the house I built was no longer mine in their eyes. I was simply the one paying the mortgage. That night, I sat on the patio with Malik, my best friend since our college design days, sipping mint tea while pretending everything was fine. He didn't buy it. He never did. So what's your plan, he asked. You going to give up the master suite and sleep next to the laundry machines like Cinderella? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope I'd picked up earlier that afternoon. It was thick with documents. He raised an eyebrow. Rosie, what's that? I handed it to him and watched the realization spread across his face. The sale's real. You actually did it. I nodded. It closes in 8 days. I'm staying quiet until then. Let them rearrange the living room for a baby shower they'll never host. Malik blinked, then grinned. You're cold. I shook my head slowly. No, I'm done. They wanted my master bedroom. What they didn't know was that I'd already sold the house. By the following Tuesday, the house no longer felt like mine in any tangible way. April had already moved half her wardrobe into my hallway closet, claiming it was just temporary until she figured out the baby's drawer situation. My mother had taken over my bathroom shelves with labeled baskets for Talia's wipes, lotions, and backup diapers, while my father quietly moved his recliner near the living room window, claiming the light was better there for reading. Though he never once opened a book, even Kevin, who had always been the quiet one, started asking if I could help him set up a workstation in my dining room, just until we figure things out. Nobody seemed to notice that I was still working full-time, with back-to-back calls and client deadlines. Or maybe they noticed and simply didn't care. At dinner, April asked if I could switch my grocery list to accommodate the baby's new feeding schedule. My mother chimed in, saying it might be helpful to make all dinners baby-friendly. Low sodium and soft textures. It's better for your digestion, too, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I sat there quietly, chewing a bite of overcooked squash I hadn't made, nodding like the practical oldest daughter they'd come to expect. But I was counting the days. The buyer, Theo, had confirmed his walkthrough for Saturday morning. He wanted an early slot, 9 a.m., before his truck arrived from New York. I had timed everything perfectly, down to the moment. My own movers would come Friday night, after everyone was asleep. Malik had offered to help shuttle the last of my personal boxes to his garage, just in case someone woke up too early and asked questions. I had started keeping my documents in the most unexpected places. One folder was hidden behind a stack of empty baking pans no one touched. The buyer's email threads were saved under an innocuous name in my work email. I even bought a second phone just to text the realtor without leaving a trail on my main device. The more they invaded, the quieter I became, not out of fear, but precision. Every insult, every request, every passive-aggressive comment added a stone to the invisible wall I was building between me and them. They had no idea. April started floating the idea of hiring a photographer for a welcome baby backyard gathering. Just something casual, she said, maybe 30, 40 people max. I raised an eyebrow. 40 people for a baby barely 2 weeks old. She shrugged. People want to celebrate. Besides, this house has the perfect light. That word again. This house. Not mine, just this house. Like it had emerged from thin air for communal use. When I didn't respond, Mom took over the planning. We'll cater, of course. Nothing too extravagant. Kevin's parents will drive in, and Aunt Lois, and maybe Pastor Harold's family if they're free. I nodded absently, already looking at the calendar in my head. Saturday, 9 a.m. Theo arrives. Saturday, noon. They find out. That gave me 3 days. That evening, as I folded laundry in the corner of the living room, now designated as the family space, Dad asked if I could move some of my clothes to the basement ahead of the guest arrival. April's going to need extra room in the master closet, he added, still looking at the TV, as if what he said was entirely normal. I kept folding silently later that night. Malik texted a photo of my storage unit keys next to a bottle of wine and the words, 4 more days. I replied with a simple emoji. I didn't need words anymore. They were spending their last week in this house, planning a party that would never happen, and I would not lift a finger to stop them. By Thursday, the baby swing had been placed directly in front of the fireplace, the bookshelves rearranged to make space for toys, and someone had moved my piano into the garage without asking. when I mentioned it. Mom waved me off. It's just for the weekend. Dear, you weren't playing it anyway. I glanced at the dent on its side and said nothing. The final shift came when I caught April walking out of my office with a measuring tape and a Pinterest board on her iPad. I was thinking Kevin could work in here after the party. She said, "It's just so much better than the dining table." I didn't answer. She smiled like she'd already made the decision. "Don't worry, I'll have it painted in something neutral." That night, I opened the envelope with Theo's name on it and reread every page. Closing was confirmed. Keys to be handed off at 9 a.m. sharp. No delays. No cancellations. The house would no longer be mine. And that was exactly the point. They had taken everything from me piece by piece without ever asking. I wasn't going to take it back with shouting or confrontation. I was going to let them find out the truth exactly when it mattered most, and not a moment before. Friday morning started like any other. The coffee machine sputtered. My inbox filled with project briefs from clients across 4 time zones, and the upstairs thudded with the sound of furniture being dragged across hardwood. April had decided the baby would sleep better if her bassinet was positioned near the south-facing window, and my mother was supervising what she referred to as a soft reset of the nursery flow. I didn't ask what that meant. I had stopped asking about anything days ago. Kevin came down to the kitchen holding my tea infuser, looking confused. "Hey, Rosie, do you know where the chamomile went? Your mom said you always keep a stash somewhere." I opened the cabinet, handed him the last bag, and said nothing. At this point, I had already moved half of my belongings into Malik's garage the night before, wrapped in blankets and taped shut with no labels, just in case. By mid-morning, the living room had been completely rearranged. My framed artwork was replaced with pastel garlands. A new rug had arrived and been rolled out without warning. Pink, with cartoon rabbits. When I asked where my old one went, April responded from behind her laptop with a distracted tone. "It's in the basement. We figured you wouldn't need it up here anymore." I nodded, pretending not to care, even as my stomach turned. Malik texted to confirm the final moving truck for midnight. All I had to do was get through 12 more hours. That afternoon, the first crack in the surface appeared. My mother entered the laundry room holding a crumpled envelope, her lips tight. "Rosie," she said, "why is there a letter from a property management company addressed to someone named Theo?" I looked up from the dryer and wiped my hands on a towel. Probably junk mail. Could be the last tenants. Her eyes narrowed. "You've lived here 5 years." I shrugged. "Then maybe it's the neighbor. Their mail gets mixed in sometimes." She didn't push, but her expression stayed with me long after she left the room. I texted Malik immediately. "She found a letter. We need to be fast tonight." He replied with one word, "On it." At dinner, the tension shifted. My father asked if I had confirmed enough folding chairs for the baby shower. April added that the caterer needed to do a walkthrough in the kitchen early Saturday to prepare. My mother said casually that she had moved my chef's knives into the back drawer to make room for the dessert trays. I watched them speak as if none of it involved me, as if this was their house, as if I was the one being generously allowed to stay for the first time. I looked around my own dining table and felt like a guest in my own story. After dessert, April handed me a folded list. "Can you order these by tonight? Just groceries and wine. Make sure it's the organic Pinot, not the cheap one you usually get." I took the list, glanced at the brands, then folded it in half without a word. Kevin started to say something but stopped himself. Later, while I was packing the last few things in my bedroom, he knocked lightly and stepped inside. "This is getting out of control," he said quietly. "I didn't know they moved your piano." I nodded, wrapping the last of my photo frames in a scarf. "It's fine. I won't need it where I'm going." He looked confused but didn't press. Around 10:30, the lights in the house finally dimmed. I waited 30 more minutes to be safe. Malik pulled into the driveway with the truck's headlights off, parked low near the hedge. We moved quickly, silently, room by room. He had done this before. I handed off boxes from my closet, my bookshelf, the lower cabinets that no one else checked. By 1 a.m, everything I owned that mattered was gone. The rooms still looked full, but they were hollow, like a stage set built for a story I no longer wanted to tell. Back inside, I walked into my now empty bedroom and sat on the floor. I stared at the pale indentation left on the carpet where my dresser used to be and felt nothing, no sadness, no anger, just clarity. I pulled out the final envelope and read through the checklist for tomorrow one last time. Walk through at 9, keys at 10, possession by noon. I had told Theo to use the front door and introduce himself normally. I wanted them to hear it from him, not me. I wanted them to realize, slowly and clearly, that this house was never theirs, and it never would be. I turned off the lamp and lay down in the silence. One final night under a roof I once called mine. It wouldn't be mine much longer, but for once, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like a beginning. Saturday morning arrived quietly. The house was still, the kind of stillness that only happens before something unspoken begins to move. I woke up before anyone else, brewed coffee, and sat at the edge of the kitchen counter like I had done hundreds of times before, except this time. I didn't reach for my laptop. I just watched the clock. The email had said 9 a.m. sharp, and knowing Theo, he would be early. He was meticulous, the kind of buyer who read every document twice and sent follow-up questions in bullet form. I liked that about him. He didn't leave anything to assumption. And today, he would walk into this house like it was already his, because it was. At 8:47, I heard movement upstairs. My mother's voice echoed faintly through the vents, calling April to help with the baby's onesie drawer. Dad's slow footsteps followed. The familiar morning chaos had begun, but they were still living inside the version of the story where they thought they had control. I didn't interrupt them. I let them get dressed for a party that would never happen. At 8:59, the doorbell rang. I didn't hesitate. I walked calmly across the hallway, opened the door. And there was Theo, holding a leather folder and wearing the same composed smile he always did. Behind him, the moving truck was already parked at the curb, its logo discreet but unmistakable. "Morning," he said, right on time. I nodded and stepped aside. "Come in." Theo's eyes scanned the foyer, then moved upward, noting the pastel garlands, the floral welcome sign that April had hung last night, the pile of wrapped baby gifts stacked neatly beside the fireplace. "Looks like we're crashing something," he murmured. "Not really," I said. "They just don't know yet." He chuckled softly, then turned back to his folder. "Do you want me to start upstairs or down?" Before I could answer, my mother appeared at the top of the staircase. Her face froze when she saw him. "Rosie," she said slowly. "Who is this?" Theo offered a polite smile. "I'm Theo, just doing a walkthrough before the move-in." She blinked, then looked at me, then back at him. "Move-in." Her voice cracked slightly. "Rosie, what is he talking about?" I didn't respond. I simply gestured toward the living room. "Can everyone come downstairs?" It'll be easier to explain all at once. April came down carrying the baby, followed by Kevin, who looked half asleep, still holding a bottle of formula. Dad stood behind them silently, arms crossed. "Rosie," my mother said again, firmer this time. "What is going on?" I waited until they were all seated, then spoke with the same tone I used in client meetings. Calm, direct, final. "This house has been sold. Theo is the new owner. Closing happened yesterday. He officially takes possession as of now." For a second, no one moved. Then April laughed. Like I had told a strange joke, very funny, but seriously, what's going on? I looked her in the eye. "You have 2 hours to pack your things. The movers will be here by noon." Her face drained of color. My mother stood up slowly, her hand gripping the side of the couch. "You're lying. This is your house. You're not allowed to do this. We're family." I let the silence hang in the air. Then I said it again, slower this time. "Not anymore." Kevin glanced at Theo, then at me. "Wait, is this real?" Theo cleared his throat. "I have the signed closing documents and the deed transfer. I'm sorry for the surprise, but this was a legal sale." Dad finally spoke. "Rosie, you didn't even warn us. You just sold it out from under us." "No," I said. "I sold it after 5 years of hosting people who never paid rent, never said thank you, and made me feel like a stranger in my own home." April's mouth opened, but no words came. The baby started fussing. Kevin rocked her gently. My mother turned to me, voice shaking. "We have nowhere else to go. You have options," I replied. "You've always had options. You just didn't like any that required effort." Theo took a step back. "I'll give you a moment," he said quietly. I nodded as he walked toward the kitchen to make a call. My mother followed him in a panic, trying to argue, trying to delay. April stood frozen. Kevin finally looked up and met my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I answered without flinching. "Because you would have tried to stop me, and I needed this to be clean." Upstairs, I heard the first sounds of drawers opening, things being thrown into bags. It had begun. The end they never saw coming was here, unfolding in slow motion right in front of them. I walked outside for air, the morning sun warm against my skin. Malik's car was already parked across the street, just like we planned. He gave me a nod through the windshield. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and said out loud, "Let the fallout begin." Back inside the house, the temperature had changed, not physically, but emotionally. My mother stood at the kitchen island, clutching her phone like a weapon, her voice shrill as she demanded answers from someone at the county clerk's office. April paced near the staircase, holding the baby in one arm and sending furious texts with the other. Kevin had disappeared upstairs, and my father sat silently on the edge of the couch, blinking like the world had gone off script. I stepped back in and headed straight for the dining room, where Theo was quietly flipping through the final paperwork. He looked up as I approached and gave a small nod. "Everything's confirmed. I just need to start moving my furniture in by noon." I glanced at the clock. "You'll have space. Don't worry." Before I could leave the room, April stormed in, eyes wide, her voice just barely controlled. "Where are we supposed to go, Rosie? You expect us to pack up everything in 2 hours with a newborn." I didn't flinch. "You had 5 years to plan. This isn't about 2 hours. This is about 5 years of not listening." Her mouth opened, ready to argue, but Kevin suddenly appeared behind her, holding 2 duffel bags and a box of diapers. "I'll start loading the car," he said quietly. April spun around. "Are you kidding me? You're siding with her?" He didn't respond, just walked past her slowly. carefully stepping around a pile of gift bags stacked near the foyer. My mother followed me back into the hallway, now visibly unraveling. You know this is cruel. This is not how family behaves. You don't throw blood out onto the street like garbage. I turned to face her, calm but clear. You threw me out the day you decided my bedroom was negotiable. You just didn't use your hands. Her lips trembled. We're your parents. I nodded. Yes, and I gave you every chance to act like it. But instead, you acted like tenants with no lease and endless demands. Her hands clenched at her sides. Mascara smudged under her eyes. You could have talked to us. I met her gaze without blinking. I did. You just called it complaining. In the middle of this standoff, Kevin returned with a surprising voice of reason. I found a short-term rental 10 minutes away, he said. Standing beside April, it's furnished, 3 bedrooms, available immediately. I've already put down the deposit. April stared at him like he'd lost his mind. With what money? He looked at her squarely. With mine, from my savings. You know, the ones we weren't supposed to touch because we always had Rosie's place to fall back on. She turned away, jaw clenched. My mother tried again, her voice now a desperate whisper. We were going to host everyone today. You've humiliated us. I shook my head. You humiliated yourselves. You planned a party in a house you didn't own without asking the owner. That's not love. That's entitlement. Theo appeared again near the doorway. Apologies. But the movers just arrived. They'll start with the garage entrance to avoid disrupting the front. My father stood up abruptly, as if that word had finally broken whatever trance he'd been under. You can't move things into our home while we're still here. That's not legal. Kevin sighed, pulled out a printout from his pocket, and handed it to him. You never signed a lease. You've never paid rent. You've been guests. This document confirms the legal transfer. Rosie is within her rights. My dad stared at the paper, but didn't read it. He just let his hand fall to his side. I walked to the staircase, paused, and looked up at the hallway that used to feel like mine. The wall art, the rug, the shelf of books now buried under baby bottles and framed ultrasound photos. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a version of myself I had outgrown. April followed behind me, holding the baby tighter now. You'll regret this, she hissed. You'll wake up one day and realize how heartless you've become. I looked at her, not with anger, but clarity. No, I'll wake up and realize I finally chose myself. Downstairs, boxes were being rolled out the side entrance. One of the movers gently carried out the dusty upright piano someone had pushed into the garage. I watched them for a long moment. Then I turned away and closed the bedroom door behind me for the final time. Not because I was angry, but because I was free. By 10:30, the kitchen was cluttered with half-packed boxes and abandoned gift baskets. The welcome banner still hung over the fireplace, now drooping at one corner as if it, too, had given up. My mother had stopped yelling. Her voice had turned into something worse, a quiet, strained muttering that filled the room like humidity before a storm. April wasn't speaking to anyone. She kept disappearing into the guest room and reappearing with items that didn't belong to her, stuffing them blindly into oversized tote bags. Kevin remained calm, moving with quiet efficiency as he folded blankets and loaded their car, not for show, but because he knew it needed to be done. My father hadn't spoken since the deed transfer was handed to him. He simply sat on the couch, staring at a wall that had once displayed my framed college degree, now replaced with pastel clouds and a string of paper hearts. At one point, Malik knocked gently on the open door and stepped inside with 2 iced coffees. I took mine. the cup cool against my hand, and sipped slowly while watching a mover navigate around my mother, who stood frozen in the hallway like a misplaced prop. This was inevitable. Malik said under his breath, "They just thought they had more time." I nodded. They always think there's more time until someone stops pretending. He didn't respond, just placed his coffee on the counter and stepped outside again, giving me space. Theo appeared briefly with the final checklist in hand. "We're on schedule. Would you like me to walk through one more time before I begin?" I shook my head. "No need. It's yours now, all of it." He gave a respectful nod and disappeared toward the back of the house, leaving behind the faint sound of movers measuring door frames. April cornered me near the laundry room about 15 minutes before they were set to leave, her baby on her hip, her voice low but piercing. "You could have told me, even a week's notice. I would have found another way." I stared at her and waited before answering. "You already had another way. You just didn't want to use it. You had a house. Remember the one you said was too far from the good daycare, the one you refused to renovate because this was easier?" She looked away but didn't argue. The baby squirmed in her arms, sensing the tension that had thickened the air. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," she said finally. "You've always let things slide." I took a deep breath. Not anymore. My mother's final attempt came just before noon, as the last suitcase was being wheeled down the front steps. Her voice wasn't angry now. It was something closer to wounded pride, the kind of tone that demanded pity without asking for it outright. "We didn't mean to take advantage. Things just got comfortable. You know how family is." I looked her in the eye and let her words hang between us. Then I replied, quiet but steady. "Family doesn't mean free rein. It means mutual respect. And if I had kept allowing this, I would have been teaching all the wrong lessons to myself and to you." She blinked at me, but didn't answer. She turned, picked up her handbag, and followed my father silently out the door. Kevin was the last to leave. He placed the baby's car seat into the back of their SUV and looked up at me one last time. "I know you did what you had to do, and I know you didn't do it lightly." I nodded. "Thank you for understanding." He offered a small smile. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing, maybe the only thing." Then he got into the car and pulled away slowly, April looking straight ahead, unreadable. My mother didn't glance back. My father kept his eyes on the dashboard, just like that. They were gone. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was open. It felt like someone had opened a window after a storm and let the stale air out. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by moving boxes and folded furniture blankets, and realized I wasn't mourning anything. I wasn't second-guessing or replaying old conversations or wondering if I should have done more to prevent the rift. I had done everything. I had given them time, space, support, silence, patience, and forgiveness. And they had taken all of it as a given. Now, they would have to learn what it felt like to stand on their own again, without leaning on the one person they never thanked. Theo walked in from the garage entrance, clipboard in hand, smiling lightly. "Looks like we're officially moved in." I nodded. "Congratulations." He hesitated, then added, "They'll be okay. You know, eventually." I looked out the window, saw the last car turning the corner, and finally let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "I know," I said, "but so will I." I didn't go back into the house once they left. Instead, I stood on the sidewalk across the street next to Malik's car, sipping the last of my now warm iced coffee while watching Theo's movers carry in a new life. Box by box, the living room was being transformed again, but this time, not with baby gear or uninvited guests, just simple. Adult furniture, a reclaimed oak dining table, an old camera tripod, a floor lamp with a chip shade. It felt real, uncomplicated. The kind of imperfection I'd always been told to hide, now carried proudly through the door. Malik handed me the second set of condo keys and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I slid into the passenger seat, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes as the car pulled away. The condo was smaller than the house, of course, just 2 bedrooms, one of which I had already turned into a creative studio with blackout curtains and acoustic panels. The walls were plain white, but the light that poured through the windows was warm, grounding. When I stepped onto the balcony and looked out over the city, I didn't miss the lawn, the guest room, or the cluttered kitchen. I didn't miss the years of walking on eggshells or adjusting my habits to match someone else's expectations. I missed nothing. I just stood there, breathing without apology. For the first time in years, I spent that weekend doing what I hadn't done in months, sleeping without earplugs, cooking without cleaning up someone else's mess first, sitting on the couch without needing to explain where I was going next. I didn't hear a single drawer open that I hadn't touched myself. No one asked if I was free to pick up groceries or help rearrange storage bins. No one called me selfish. The silence wasn't heavy. It was clean, pure, like wiping a chalkboard after years of half-erased drawings layered on top of one another. On Monday morning, I woke up early, made a slow breakfast, and opened my laptop to a blank document. I started writing not a client brief or campaign copy, but my story. Just 1 page at first, then 2, then 10. I didn't stop. I didn't censor it to protect anyone's feelings. I wrote everything, from the first day they moved in to the last minute they left. I titled the draft, How I Reclaimed My Space, and closed my laptop, feeling lighter than I had in years. Malik read it that evening and suggested I publish it anonymously on a personal blog. I hesitated at first, not because I was afraid, but because I knew the truth might land in unexpected places. Still, I hit post and went to bed without regrets. 2 days later, the blog had been shared over 300 times. Comments flooded in, not from trolls, but from people who recognized themselves in my silence, women, men, even adult children in similar situations, people who had let their boundaries erode out of guilt and who were now finding words for things they'd buried under obligation. The post went viral within a week. A local podcast reached out for an interview. I said yes. Not because I needed attention, but because someone had to name what so many people live through behind closed doors. Not abuse, not chaos, just quiet erosion, the kind that convinces you it's easier to bend than to speak. That same week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small velvet box. I opened it and stared for a long time. It was my bracelet, the one that had been broken during the dresser move, now repaired with a new clasp. No note, just a name scrawled in faint handwriting under the lid. My mother's. I didn't cry. I didn't text her. I just closed the box and placed it in my drawer. I wasn't ready, and I didn't owe anyone a deadline. Later that evening, Kevin texted. He and April had moved into the rental. He said it was smaller, but quiet. He said April had finally agreed to let a contractor inspect the house they owned. He said they'd be fine. I believed him. He didn't ask for anything, just thanked me. For what? He didn't say, but I understood. That night, as I sat on my balcony again, watching the orange light fade into the Portland sky, I thought about everything I had lost. Then I realized I hadn't lost anything that mattered. What I'd let go of was weight. What I'd gained was clarity. The messages came gradually, not in a rush like I had imagined. No dramatic apologies or pleas, just small ripples, scattered across the weeks that followed. A photo from Kevin of the baby sitting up on her own, followed by a quiet line. She still looks for you when we pass the park near your old house. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Then I sent a single sentence. I hope she grows up in a home built on choice, not guilt. He hearted the message and didn't push for more. Later that month, my mother posted a status online that Malik screenshotted and sent to me with a raised eyebrow emoji. It read, "Sometimes letting go is an act of love, not cruelty. Learning that now." The caption sat beneath a photo of her repotting a plant in what I guessed was the balcony of their temporary apartment. I didn't comment, didn't call. I knew what that post was meant to do, a breadcrumb, a gentle knock on a door she used to barge through. This time, she waited outside. I respected that. April didn't write me directly, but I saw her name appear under comments on the blog. Never speaking, just reacting. A heart here, a clap there, a save post. One day. I noticed she had followed the podcast that interviewed me. Then she started reposting quotes about boundaries and self-worth. No tags, no mentions. But they were there. I understood. Some people say sorry through action, others through silence. Then came the voicemail from my father, a voice I hadn't heard since the day he muttered, "You didn't even warn us." His message was only 23 seconds. "Hey, Rosie, I know I haven't said much, but I read what you wrote, not just the blog, all of it. You're right, about everything. I'm trying to understand what I ignored. I'm sorry it took this long." He hung up without asking me to call back. I didn't. I listened again a few days later, then deleted it, not out of anger, but peace. I had finally reached the point where I didn't need their remorse to validate my clarity. The house, from what I heard, was doing fine. Theo had turned the backyard into a native plant garden. The pastel garlands were gone. The nursery walls had been painted over with soft green. And the front porch now had a bench swing instead of folding chairs. Malik drove by once and sent me a photo. "Looks like it belongs to someone now," he wrote. And it did. It belonged to someone who saw it as shelter, not strategy, a place to live, not to manipulate. I stayed quiet for the first 3 months. Then, one rainy afternoon, I sent my mother a message. No paragraphs, no emotional excavation, just 4 words. "How are you doing?" She replied 5 hours later. One day at a time. I didn't push for more. She didn't ask for a call. That was the rhythm now. Care without control. Kevin updated me a few weeks later that they'd signed the lease on a smaller house near the edge of town. April had finally agreed to make it home. Not just backup. He said she painted the baby's room herself, yellow, with white stars. He didn't say anything about forgiveness. He didn't need to. Sometimes progress isn't an apology, it's a shift. When spring arrived, I hosted a quiet dinner at my condo, just Malik, a few colleagues, no family. I cooked slowly, played music I liked, and opened the balcony doors without checking for noise complaints. Halfway through dessert, Malik raised his glass and said, "This is the most like you I've seen in years." I didn't say thank you. I didn't dismiss it. I just smiled and took another sip. That night, lying in bed, I realized something I hadn't put into words before. I didn't miss them. I missed who I thought they'd be when I gave them everything. But what I had now was real. Quiet mornings, clean boundaries, conversations that didn't spiral, space to breathe. I had fought so hard to protect a version of family I thought I was supposed to tolerate. What I found instead was a version of self I could finally live with. The email came on a Thursday morning, tucked between a client approval thread and a grocery delivery confirmation. Subject line: a small note from Mom. I opened it without hesitation, not expecting much, not hoping for anything specific. Inside was a short paragraph. She said she'd started therapy. She said she was learning how to pause before filling silence with orders. She said April had started working part-time again, and Dad had signed up for a senior's computer class too. In his words, finally understand this digital world everyone lives in. At the end of the message, there was a line that stopped me. I don't expect you to write back. Rosie, I just wanted you to know we're working on becoming the people you believed we could be. I closed the email and sat with it. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. The same way I sat with a warm cup of tea now. No interruptions, no explanations. Just me and the weight of my own breath. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was something I hadn't had words for before. I felt released, like I had finally dropped the invisible rope I'd spent my entire adult life pulling toward a version of family that refused to meet me halfway. That weekend, I drove out of the city for the first time in months. Just me. A playlist of old jazz songs, and no destination except motion. I ended up in a small coastal town 2 hours north, where the air smelled like salt and pine, and the coffee shop didn't have Wi-Fi. I booked a room in a bed and breakfast that reminded me of the houses I used to draw when I was a child. White porch, 2 rocking chairs, a wind chime that didn't sound like anything but still felt like music. I spent 3 days there doing absolutely nothing that looked like progress on paper. I didn't check emails. I didn't post photos. I didn't tell anyone I was gone. On the last night, I stood at the edge of a small bluff just beyond the inn's back porch and watched the tide roll in. The ocean didn't ask me who I had disappointed or what I had to prove. It just moved, always forward, always returning, never asking permission to take space. And in that moment, I realized something so simple it almost startled me. I had spent years believing I had to earn rest, that I had to be good enough, useful enough, agreeable enough to deserve silence. But I didn't. I only had to choose it. That was the part no one had taught me. That freedom wasn't given. It was claimed. When I returned to Portland, the condo felt even smaller than I remembered, but in the best way, like something that fit. I rearranged the books on my shelves, not for aesthetics, but because I could. I changed the sheets on a Wednesday. I signed up for a short fiction class online, not because I needed the skill, but because I missed storytelling for myself on quiet nights. I sometimes read old journal entries from the year before and marveled at the voice, not the sadness, but the softness, the way I had still tried to make excuses for everyone. Even while drowning in their expectations, I wasn't angry at that version of me. She was doing her best with what she thought love meant. One afternoon, I walked past the grocery store where I used to run errands for the house, and something small but undeniable shifted. I didn't feel like a caretaker anymore. I didn't flinch when I passed the wine aisle, where my mother once asked me to replace the cheap kind with something worthy of her palate. I just kept walking, unbothered, untouched, like I'd shed the obligation without bitterness, only clarity. That night, Malik came over for dinner, and while we were cleaning up, he asked if I'd ever consider reconnecting with them. I didn't answer right away. I wiped the counter, rinsed the pan, and finally said, maybe, but not as their lifeline, not as the default fixer, only as me, and only if they see me that way too. He nodded. He understood. And I realized then that maybe the real revenge wasn't the sale of the house or the shock on their faces that day. Maybe the real transformation was quieter. The moment I stopped waiting for them to catch up and started walking at my own pace, not out of spite, not out of pride, just out of necessity. Because sometimes choosing yourself isn't loud. It's a door that closes softly behind you while you exhale for the first time in years. It was almost a year to the day when I passed the house again, not on purpose. I had taken a different turn while running errands and found myself near that familiar corner. The hedges had been trimmed, the fence repainted, and the old mailbox I once hated had been replaced with a newer, sleeker one. The porch light was on, though it was barely sunset, and through the window I could see a dining table set for two, clean and quiet, no clutter, no gift bags, just chairs pushed in evenly, and a vase of yellow tulips catching the last light of the evening. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down, but something in me paused, not in regret, in quiet recognition. That chapter was finished, not erased, not torn out, just turned. Later that evening, I opened my laptop and found a draft I had nearly forgotten, the blog post that started everything. It had now been read more than 500,000 times, shared by therapists, reposted by forums, and featured in an online magazine about setting boundaries in adulthood. The title hadn't changed. My family wanted my master bedroom. They didn't know I'd already sold the house, but the comments had. The newest ones were less about shock and more about reflection. People who weren't asking how to get revenge, but how to reclaim peace. People who had stayed silent for years and were now whispering the first word of no. People who had confused self-sacrifice with love and were finally learning the difference. One message stood out that night. It came from someone named Alina, a woman in her late 40s who had taken care of her parents since she was 23. She wrote, "You reminded me that I'm not selfish for wanting a door that closes. I'm not cruel for wanting a life that's mine. Thank you." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I closed the screen and sat with the stillness of my living room. There were no echoes, no background noise, no footsteps overhead. Just me, in a space I chose, surrounded by furniture I paid for, filled with a version of myself I had finally stopped hiding. A few weeks later, I got a small card in the mail, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's, slightly slanted, always looping the lowercase g's too wide. Inside, just 2 sentences. We're still learning, still trying. And underneath, in a separate pen, clearly added later, a simple question. Would you ever come visit? Even just for tea, I didn't reply right away. Not because I was angry, but because I had learned to pause, to check in with myself before responding to guilt dressed as softness. A week later, I sent a postcard back. It had no message, only a photo of the coast where I had found my breath again. I wasn't ready to sit at their table, but I wasn't slamming the door shut either. I used to think boundaries were walls. Now I know they're doors with locks you hold the key to. You get to choose when to open them, and for whom. Not everyone who knocks deserves entry. Some just need to stand outside long enough to realize that access isn't love, that presence isn't permission, that silence doesn't mean surrender. Today, I work fewer hours. I laugh more. I listen to jazz again without thinking of who might ask me to turn it down. I go to the grocery store and buy the wine I like, without apologizing for the price. I don't answer every message. I don't accept every invitation. And when people call me distant, I smile, knowing they mean I've finally built enough distance between me and their expectations. Every now and then, someone from the past asks if I feel guilty, if I ever think I went too far. I always tell them the truth. I didn't go far at all. I finally came home, not to a house, but to a version of myself I had been deferring for far too long. So now I ask you, the one reading this quietly, perhaps wondering if it's time to choose yourself, what's the door you've been too afraid to close? And more importantly, who have you been allowing in, simply because you were taught that being good meant staying quiet? Because here's what I've learned. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is leave the room before they decide what part of it you're allowed to keep.